Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests, and welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm Teresa Holmes, Club President. Thank you for joining us today. Today's meeting is sponsored by Valerie Rank and Habitat for Humanity, Dane County, along with Mark Moody. Our thanks for their generous support of today's luncheon. We open the meeting with the sad news of the death of one of our longtime members. Tom Lucas passed away on July 15th at the age of 98. Tom worked for the state of Wisconsin as the Director of Emergency Welfare for many years, and he was also a member of our club since 1987. Tom's late wife and late father-in-law were also members of our club. Our club has made a $100 contribution to our Madison Rotary Foundation to establish a memorial in Tom's name. Anyone wishing to contribute to this fund can send their contribution to the Rotary office. We extend our sympathies to Tom's family, and so let's pause for a moment of silence as we remember Tom Lucas. Our opening music, as we direct our attention to the sounds and songs, Heidi Frankson will sing us or lead us in the singing of America the Beautiful and Casey Okers on the keyboard. Following music, our guests will be introduced by Melanie Ramey.
My turn. I'm shorter than you, lady. Well, actually, before we get started today, as we were researching this song, I mean, everyone knows America the Beautiful, right? But we had no idea that the lyrics were written in 1898 by a lady. And her name was Catherine Lee Bates, and the music, it was set to music by Samuel Ward, and she wrote it from the poem from Pikes Peak in Colorado. And it was very inspiring. And what was really neat, and we're saying this because she wrote it on July 22nd, which is tomorrow. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
And now Melanie Ramey will introduce today's guests.
Well, we have quite a few guests today, and it's really very nice to see some different faces, and I encourage the rest of you to think in terms of inviting people to lunch, because this is a good way to develop membership. So we're going to ask you, when I call your name, to please stand, and then we'll welcome everybody at once. The first guest we have is Ray Feliz, and Ray is a guest of Peter Gray. Now, Peter Gray is also here. I saw him on television last weekend walking 50 miles. So in any event, he lived to tell about it, and he's here today too. We also have Grant Meadows, who is a guest of Rob Stroud, and we have Annette Smith, who is a guest of Steve Goldberg. Now, Steve Goldberg also had invited two other women, and they stood him up. But he's probably used to that by now. There we have Betty Berquist, who is a guest of Tom Pop. And we have Xavier Foley. Now, Xavier is really a talented person. He is going to play a solo tonight in the concerts in Bree Stevens Field. and he is a guest of Ken Yuska, who also plays the bass. Also, we have Bean Rickers, and Bean Rickers is a guest of, I think, a lot of people, although Larry paid for his lunch, but he seemed to know everybody. We also have Janet Dyer, who is a guest of the Rotary Advisory Committee, as is Michelle Henning, as is Jean O'Leary, and as is Christine Reed. So they are all of the Rotary Advisory Committee. Then we have some special guests, Judy Pfeiffer, who is a guest of the Senior Service Committee, Judy. And we have David Lunny, who is a guest of the Senior Service Committee. And we have Anne Marie Lunny, who is also a guest of the Senior Service Committee. We also have Ed Futa, and Ed Futa is a former RI General Secretary. And he told me that as a General Secretary, he got to know all the Rotary clubs in the world, and he chose this one to come back and live in Madison. So we're really glad to have Ed. Also, I determined that he drinks Scotch whiskey, so I invited him to the fellowship group. And speaking of that, we have George Bosch, and George Bosch is a Rotarian from New Mexico. There he is, George. And George comes to the Scotch whiskey group all the way from New Mexico, so that just tells you what a wonderful group we are. But those are our guests today, and we want to welcome them all together.
Thank you, Melanie. And thank you for attending today's luncheon, our guests. On occasion, I'm going to ask us to recite the Rotary four-way test. So if we could, let's start by reciting it together. The Rotary four-way test of the things we say, think, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all those concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And is it be beneficial to all those concerned? Our senior service guest. Today we have a senior service guest to introduce members. Ron Luskin will come up and make that introduction.
Thank you, President Teresa. I'm just going to mention that these words were prepared for March 18 of 2020. You remember March 18, 2020? We didn't have a meeting then, and thankfully our guest is here today with our awardee is here today with his guests. So today we recognize William G. Bill, as everybody calls him, Lunny, as recipient of Rotary Club of Madison Senior Service Award. Mr. Lunny's work over the past many years epitomized the notion of service above self. Bill has been the consummate public servant by serving 6 terms as a Dane County supervisor, 5 years as president of Friends of Wisconsin State Parks, and more notably, serving 30 years as chair of the Dane County Parks Commission. Mr. Lunny arrived in Madison in 1966. He is a native of New York and earned a law degree from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Upon his arrival in Madison, he worked in the administration of Governor Warren Knowles and later worked in the Wisconsin Supreme Court's Administrator of Courts Office, which is where I became acquainted with Bill in 1977. And at that time, it was a major initiative for court reform of our state court system that Bill was involved with. Over the past 5 decades, Bill has been a fixture on the local environmental scene, championing land protection efforts. He was an early advocate for protecting Dunn's Marsh from development and protecting wetlands statewide. During his tenure as chair of the Dane County Parks Commission, Dane County parkland and natural resource areas quadrupled from 3,500 acres to over 15,000 acres. Additionally, yes, please. Additionally, over many years, Mr. Lunny also held leadership positions with the Nature Conservancy, the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin, Friends of Wisconsin State Parks, and the Gathering Waters Conservancy. I'm quoting now. The continuity of Bill's commitment to Dane County Parks is remarkable, says Mike Slavny, past chair of the Natural Heritage Land Trust, now known as Groundswell Conservancy. He provided the historical context, the policy acumen, and the experience to help the park system evolve from picnic tables and horseshoe pits to the full range of public benefits it provides. With the help of his wife, Judy, who's here today, the foundation for Dane County Parks was established. In 6 years, they were instrumental in raising money to create an endowed fund of over $750,000, which provides ongoing support. Now, each year, the fund makes thousands of dollars of grants for a variety of different projects. One such project funded new fishing piers in 8 different parks to provide access for people with disabilities. It is commonly understood a place is improved by its natural beauty and one's access to nature. Here in Dane County, the quality of life of our citizens have been enhanced by our amazing county park system, which offers both individual and group opportunities for recreation and achievement. For all of this, we owe a great debt of gratitude to our awardee today, William G. Bill Lunny.
Thank you, Ron. As I mentioned last week, Melanie Ramey is coordinating our weekly meeting sponsors. And so today, she will come up and tell us more about it.
I am getting overworked today. Some of you were not listening probably back in late May when I made the first announcement about sponsoring our club luncheons. As you know, the Rotary Club were hit by the pandemic just like everybody else, and our club certainly was. And as a matter of fact, we lost a little over 50 members last year, and of course had to use some of our reserves to meet our ongoing obligations. And so the board developed the Rotary Pandemic Recovery Strategy. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to promote your business at a Rotary meeting. And that is by sponsoring or co-sponsoring one of our luncheon meetings. And I was given the task of selling the sponsorships. Actually, it's going pretty well, and I really want to thank Valerie Rink and Mark Moody for co-sponsoring today. But I have been having some problems with some of the rest of you. I'm not sure what they are. I'm not sure if you don't read at grade level, or maybe you just weren't brung up right. But you know, when I send you an email and I explain the whole situation and I say, would you like to sponsor, co-sponsor, there are 2 responses. One, you can say, no thanks, or 2, you can say yes, but say something. Because as you may have guessed, I am not going quietly into the good night. And so I will be back. Now, I'll give an example of what happened. Alex Vitania, I don't know if he's here today, but at any rate, he had told Pat that he wanted to do something, sponsor. So I sent Alex an email, no response. I sent him a second email, no response. I looked up his phone number, sent him a text message, no response. I looked in the obituaries, he wasn't there. And so then I sent a final get well message, and I said, I was so sorry to hear that you had broken all 10 fingers. And I know that is why you did not respond to any of my messages. And when they're healed, please respond. So he responded. And so, you know, it's this kind of thing, but I'm not going away. And some of you owe me responses right now. And so I want to tell you, though, there are some other questions people have asked. And one of the questions everybody asks is, will I be able to speak from the podium? The answer to that question is, life is short. We do not have time for that. And you cannot speak from the podium. But I do encourage you to be creative. Now, there are lots of creative things to do, and actions actually speak louder than words. For example, next week we're going to have be sponsored by a bank. And so I said to that banker, no, you cannot speak from the podium, but you could bring free samples. Now, if you ever got a free sample from your bank, you'd probably have a heart attack. But by the same token, the next time you win the lottery, you'd put all your money there. So be creative. Now, I thought about Marv Levy. I don't know if Marv is here today, but Marv owns a big wine and liquor distributing company. So I could just imagine Marv bringing us all one of those little bottles of wine, or maybe a big bottle to go on the table. I mean, would certainly liven up the place here someday. I mean, that would be a creative thing. Well, one of the lawyers said, well, what can we do? We just shuffle papers all the time. Well, I had a great idea for them. They could give get out of jail free cards. And the next time any of us ended up in jail, we could call them up and they would rush right over, represent us at our initial hearing for free, and then they could see that our bail was no greater than $100,000. I mean, this would be a real big service. So, I mean, be creative. Now, other people have asked, well, can nonprofits do this? Absolutely. I mean, here's Bob Sword sitting over there on millions of dollars. He can certainly eke out enough to sponsor a group. Also, one of the members who's retired from business said, I would like to underwrite a nonprofit to sponsor, and that's a really good idea too. So, these are all ways in which that you can either sponsor or help get a sponsor. So I would tell you, of course, today I have been speaking words, but I'm going to take action. The action is I'm going to be sending you emails, I'm going to be sending you texts, I'm going to be calling. If I don't hear back, I know where you live, and I will arrive around dinner time. So instead of having to put an extra plate on the table for me to come, you just better answer my emails, and we'll all be happier. So thank you very much.
I have two responses to that. First, I'm glad. Oh, you did? Oh, she dropped something. Oh. Well, I'm glad that she didn't have to come after me for responses when I sponsored last week. Oh, she's, what is this? It's an envelope. Oh, wait, Melanie, thank you. She dropped a dues bill envelope. Yeah, it's a dues bill envelope. It's a statement. Oh, and a letter from the president. Well, I'm glad Melanie dropped that because it's a reminder that at the end of today's meeting, I am turning in my dues bill. It's right inside there. I also want to remind you that for all of you, Rotarians, your dues billing was mailed to your home address on July 2nd. And remember that the dues payment is due in the Rotary office by July 30th. How many days is that from today? 9 days, I think. Right? Yeah, and remember, with this new dues and system that we have for meals, regular or standard members are now receiving 12 meal tickets. I don't have an example of mine because I put it in the basket. And if you forgot to put it in the basket today when you went through the line, you can do it on the way out the door. But those tickets will be ready for you to pick up at the beginning of each meal or meeting if you haven't already. The other item we want to note is that if you need a single ticket, you can always purchase one at the registration table. And the cost for those will be $20 even. All right, on to the rest of the meeting. Julie Swenson is one of our Rotary Scholar Mentors, and she's helping to organize an event for the Rotary Mentors and our Rotary Scholars. And so she has a quick announcement. Julie?
Thank you, President Teresa. I want to thank the over 100 Rotary members who serve as mentors to our Rotary scholars. I also want to thank Nancy Young for her many years of hosting our wonderful summer event. This year, our summer event is going to be at Breeze Stevens Field. We're going to be watching Forward Madison Football Club, that's soccer to us Americans, play against the UW men's soccer team. The event is on August 10th, and Rotary is going to be paying admission for the first 30 scholars who sign up. So, for $30, we will meet at 5:30 on August 10th at the end of the field for an unlimited buffet of brats and burgers, chips and soda, and then we'll take our seats for a 7 o'clock kickoff. Now remember, it's August 10th, so the deadline is coming up quickly. I have to give a final head count to Forward Madison by August 1st. So here's what you need to do. You need to talk to Jane, you need to make a reservation, you need to grab your scholar and come join your fellow Rotarians and their scholars for a wonderful evening at Breeze Stevens Field. I will see you there. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Ron had a question if the Rotary scholars have been advised. Yes, they have. My scholars not able to attend, as some of the scholars who attend historically black universities have to go back early. So they start school in August, but we have a plan for that. All right, birthdays. We have birthdays to celebrate with a bit of humor and wisdom that complements our Rotary mission. We also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to $100 for our club's Synergy Scholarship Fund. July, if you're in the room, Rotarian, when I call your name, please stand. July 21st, Tina Choles. July 21st, Scott Hemerson. July 21st, past President Dave Molenhoff. July 22nd, Sean Carney. July 24th, Lynn Sexton. All right. Thanks to our celebrants for their contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation. Please join me, Rotarians, in wishing them a happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you. All right, we had members in the news that will appear in the newsletter in case you want to to look at that. Before I mention a few members in the news items, though, I want to let members know that our Tammy Thayer's mom, Rotarian Tammy Thayer's mom, Mary Ann Thayer, passed away in McFarland on June 24th. Our condolences go to Tammy and her family. A few other members in the news this week. Rebecca Paré was quoted in an article, Virtual Summer Internships, How Can Employers Improve from Last Year? Society for Human Resource Managers newsletter. And Joe Loinis announces that tickets for the remaining concerts on the square have a reduced cost. Wisconsin State Journal, July 20th. All right, on to our program. Today's segment of the program is a second of a three-part series on bridging Wisconsin's rural digital divide. Last month, we introduced you to our three-part series on rural broadband in Wisconsin, a tool that we all know most of us can't live without. And although a majority of Madisonians have internet access, depending on where you live in Wisconsin, that percent is much lower. The latest estimate is that over 30% of rural households lack access. If you recall, our speaker, Brittany Beyer, the executive director of Grow North, focused her presentation on the economics of broadband, giving us a peek into the forthcoming recommended strategies of the Governor's Task Force on Rural Broadband, which she chairs. Today, our presenter will focus on bridging the digital divide of rural schools and libraries. During the past year, with schools forced to close, broadband was no longer looked at as a nicety, but to have clearly a necessity for continued education. Kurt Kiefer knows that topic well. He is the former Assistant State Superintendent for the Division of Libraries and Technology at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, which oversees all information technology efforts for DPI and provides oversight for instructional technology and library media programs across Wisconsin. It also serves as the state's library agency. Kurt was unable to be with us here today, and recently he retired to Door County. So he has provided a video presentation. And although we won't have time for Q&A, he's happy to receive an email from any Rotarian with questions that you might have. So you can send any questions that you have to the Rotary office, and they'll connect you to Kurt. We look forward to Kurt's presentation, and we have made a contribution to the the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for him speaking to us today. And now, Kurt's presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the information about the digital equity gap as it relates to students in Wisconsin. Give you just a little bit more context in terms of who I am, what I've been up to, and how it led to this particular work. I had been up until the first part of July working at the Department of Public Instruction as the Assistant State Superintendent for a division called the Division of Libraries and Technology. Little known fact, the Department of Public Instruction is not only the state education agency, it's also the state library agency. And the division that I oversaw serves actually as the state library agency. There are 385 public libraries in the state of Wisconsin to go along with those 425 school districts that we have. The other part of the division is the technology part. And in that capacity, I served as the agency's chief information officer. And the division, as it relates to technology, did some work around providing technical assistance and guidance on a wide variety of issues related to technology, including the issue of broadband and internet access for schools and libraries. And then now with the pandemic, making sure that kids were connected at home as well. So just a little more background before I got to the department. In 2010, I had been appointed by then State Superintendent Tony Evers, and I had come from the Madison School District, where I had worked for 16 years in a variety of different capacities, the last of which was as serving as the Chief Information Officer for the school district. And again, at that level, addressed a wide variety of technology-related issues. So I'm very, very familiar with Madison, a little less so from an operational perspective over the last 10 years, but the issues all pretty much run the gamut and are similar issues that are impacting school districts across the state. One of the things I should point out, one of the reasons I actually made that move from Madison to the state is because of the dilemma that many school districts face as it relates to trying to address some of the technology issues. It's important to keep in mind the context that while there are 425 school districts in the state, really there are very, very few that are large districts per se. The median sized district in the state of Wisconsin is 900 kids, a graduating class of 65 students. That's median, so that means of those 425, better than 200 of them are smaller than 900 kids. So you can imagine how difficult it might be to address some of these issues in a small, very small school district. And that's where the work of the agency is important, and being able to address some of the issues that really they don't have to address if indeed there are solutions that they can just simply implement. So keep that in mind too as it relates to this particular presentation, because that's sort of what was kind of behind it when we got going with it. Again, larger districts oftentimes will be able to take advantage of things locally, but smaller districts sometimes cannot. So, but even as as we talk about some of the work that we did here, it definitely included larger districts, and they were instrumental in terms of helping us understand how to address some of those things. So, so that gives you some context for what I'm going to share. It was pointed out that, and I know that you had Brittany Beyer here last month, to talk about the broadband topic as well. Brittany chaired the governor's task force, Governor Evers' task force, of which I was also appointed. And she did a fantastic job. She did a great job on the presentation, which I watched as well. So kudos to her, kudos to the entire task force, I think. The report is now out, and I think that it is definitely something that everyone needs to take a look at relative to the topic. These are one of the things I say routinely is, there are a lot of equity gap issues out there. But this particular issue is truly a technical issue, and we can solve it. And it's just a matter of whether or not we have the will to do it. The resources are being made available to do that now, and it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to do it, but we can do it. And I think that some of the work that we've done to get us to where we are today will help move us forward to that finish line. So with that said, I'm going to launch this presentation, and we'll see what we can do as far as giving you some sense of where we've been and where we're going. So, all right. And let's see if I can square this down just a little bit. Oh. Yeah, I kind of want to give it a little bit of real estate there so you can see everything. So, digital equity gap, that's what we're about. That's what we've been talking about. The important thing, I think, and we see this in a lot of different issues when we're trying to address things, is being able to frame the problem statement correctly, or just frame it. Oftentimes we'll jump into solutions without identifying really what we're trying to solve in terms of the problem. And so it was important for us to lay that out, and we did. And it's pretty straightforward, but this is how we declared the problem. And it was that to ensure that every K-12 student had access to the broadband resources that they needed in order to accomplish their learning goals, regardless of where they lived. So those are the pieces of this particular problem that we're trying to solve. And what you'll see is that we're attacking it from a variety of different perspectives. There are different elements of this problem, and we're trying to hit each of them. All right. The presentation that I'm going to share with you has a couple of different pieces to it. One of them is just to show you what we've done in terms of trying to put some resources in families' hands just to help them. And this was something that we did, immediately right out of the gate last spring. And it was an all hands on deck effort. And there were some wonderful partnerships that I'll talk about. The other thing that I'll spend a good amount of time on is just simply talking about the data that we've got available. Data is absolutely critical to this problem, solving this problem, and first identifying the problem and where it exists, and then also how we go about solving it, and then monitoring whether or not we're actually accomplishing what we think we're going to accomplish. So I'll show some of those things in the form of some of the dashboard and mapping resources that we've built. The other thing that I'll spend some time on is talking about the internet access resources that we've put together. There's some very interesting partnerships that are emerging now that I think will really help from a sustainability perspective, and I'll give a nod to those when we get there. And then I do want to just kind of give you a little bit of background on how we went about gathering some of the data that we've gotten, because it's it's been a multi-year kind of effort by building some systems that we've got in place, but then being able to leverage those when the opportunity presented itself for this particular immediate need and crisis, frankly. So it also loops back to this notion of the data is important, and we've got a problem as it relates to the quality of data. And I know Brittany talked a little bit about that last time, and I'll share some more about that as we go forward on this presentation regarding K-12. So as I mentioned, one of the very first things we did was we put together some resources that could be available to families. And I know a lot of school districts, I know Madison points to this resource on their website. But we worked very hard collaboratively with different entities, including the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin, where the Broadband office is housed. We do a lot of work with them. They're a great team, small but mighty. And we've been able to collaborate on several different initiatives, including putting up some resources that families could get to. That was really critical. One of the things that we did post right away was an interactive drive-up public Wi-Fi map. Our data folks and mapping folks collaborated with theirs. I know that our libraries in particular really stepped in to provide some of that information about where the public could access their public Wi-Fi. I know that there were several public libraries that literally repositioned Wi-Fi routers in their buildings when they were closed to point those routers out toward where it was more convenient to park as a means of getting access for families. So it was a very, as I said, all hands on deck initiative to get those resources out to families. It doesn't stop here, and that's what I'll share going forward. But nonetheless, it was something that we did immediately, and I think it made a huge difference for a lot of families. One of the things that I think it's really important to reiterate again is the data behind all of this, and how important it was to be able to leverage the data for a variety of different purposes. One of the most immediate things, and what everyone would assume, is that we're using the data to help understand where kids are that don't have access. And that was obviously top of mind. The other thing, though, that we had to do on the flip side of that was to be able to identify where the providers provided service so that you could actually make those connections. And some of the tools that I'll reference in a minute are perfect examples of that. The other thing that the data is really helpful for is providing local community partners with the information that they need if they're going to submit broadband grant applications. And there's a variety of different resources I mentioned earlier that we now have once in a lifetime opportunities, I think, to access resources that are going to be needed to build out that infrastructure. And the data is really, really important in order to be able to say, here's where we have a need and where we need to put those resources in order to meet those needs. The other thing that the data can be used for is as much as you are able to put an application together, oftentimes you need to simply get the local partners on board. And so having this kind of data is something that was important to be able to share with the other entities in your community, including your local elected officials, just simply being able to help them understand the need through data and get behind that and support those kinds of initiatives. Because eventually what you'll see is that the infrastructure problem has to be solved in part on a long-term kind of basis as infrastructure, and that's going to require some local investments, probably some public local investments, and getting their buy-in and their understanding is absolutely essential, and that's going to happen through the data that you've got available to help describe where the needs exist. And then while it wasn't first in mind by any means, because everyone was just simply trying to connect kids, one could assume that whenever there's public monies involved, there's always going to be a need for some accountability. And so regardless of the funding source, we always knew that we needed to have some benchmark information and then to be able to measure progress over time. So the mechanisms we've put in place allow school districts to do that, to be able to say, here's where we started, here's where we are now, here's where we are later, and so on down the road. So that accountability is important. Speaking of then some of the tools, so I'm going to share a few of these things that we built. And we built these pretty fast. I mean, oftentimes some of the things I'm going to be talking about will take 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years to get spun up. We didn't have that time. And so it was all hands on deck, as I mentioned. And thankfully, we had some great partnerships and relationships that allowed us to do that. But our team did spin up some dashboards. So clearly, when a school district is sending data along, it's really important that you give them something back in return of value. And so we've been doing that for many years with our dashboard tools. These are tools available to every school district free of charge in the state of Wisconsin. And so with this collection of data, we spun up some dashboards that allowed them to see their progress on who's connected, who's not connected, again, based on the data that they're getting submitted by their parents in their school district. But it was really helpful for them to be able to visualize where they are with things. The other thing we did was we put some of this on our public website. The previous slide was a representation of a dashboard that only school districts can see. They can actually, and that's because they can actually drill down through some of those bars and literally see the names of kiddos in their school district. So that's a secure, authenticated tool. This one that you're looking at now is not. This thing can be witnessed by anybody in the public. And so you can see a couple of the questions that we've got presented up there are the internet access question. And then also we asked, and we'll get into some details about what we did ask and what we do have are regarding devices, because devices are also imperative. As you know, kids cannot, if there's a single computing device in a family of say 3 or 4 or more kids, it's even 2 kids, it can be very difficult and challenging to be able to share that device if they're all trying to learn at the same time. So being able to understand device access was another important thing. So dashboards are one way of looking at the data, but another important way of looking at data oftentimes is geospatially or in a map. And so our mapping specialist went to town and built out some mapping tools that school districts could take a look at. These are also available on the public site. So you can look at any school district in the state and see what they're reporting in terms of the internet access. And there's another tab on this one that talks about performance. And I'll talk a little bit more about performance and what we mean by that later. But you can see that very quickly and easily what is the access and where is it and by school district. In addition to being able to simply see the answers to those questions geospatially, the other thing they obviously needed to do is to identify where internet service providers' coverage areas were. And so this is where our relationship with the Public Service Commission Broadband Office was really helpful, because they had those map layers and we had the school district layers. And so we were able to put the two together in this particular tool. Again, this is a publicly accessible site. And so it allows them to, a school district to take a look to see where in the world does, say, charter in this particular example, this is the Stevens Point area school district, where in the world does charter serve in that particular school district area, and any other providers that are there. Again, those pieces of data come from the broadband office. So it gives them a little more refined look at who serves where, and then allows them to make some better decisions. But clearly that's not necessarily good enough either. And so through our data sharing process, we've been able to take address level information from the school district side, and with the partnership that we have with a nonprofit, and a nonprofit we've been working with for some time, Education Superhighway, who also worked with the internet service providers to get address level information, and not just those broad geospatial map kind of region layers, but literally down to the address. They were able to mash that information together in this piece of software that they built. We worked as a state education agency. We worked on the data sharing agreements to make sure that people knew why the data was being collected, for what use it could be used, and certainly what it could not be used for, and how it would be protected. And so that's an ongoing kind of service that we would provide. Again, it's an example of one of those things that, why in the world would we have 425 school districts figure out how to put those assurances together? And so we standardized something that worked across the state. And so school districts would submit their data through a secure portal that we collaborated with Education Superhighway on. Similarly, the providers would do the same thing for Education Superhighway. And then in this interface, the school district could literally look at where addresses are that needed service for their kids, and which providers are actually available at those addresses. So it's a wonderful example of how, and this was built incredibly fast, and it's going to endure into the future. This is a no-cost product. There is nothing of cost to this. That's by virtue of the way Education Superhighway functions. They years ago, we got involved with them when we were trying to get connected to getting the connections at schools that were going to be adequate. And they did a fantastic job working through the efforts at the Federal Communications Commission, led to some significant increases in funding for broadband at school sites. And actually, interestingly, we're set to sunset their activity because they had accomplished this goal when the pandemic hit. And so several of us who had worked with them said, boy, oh boy, it'd be nice if you could help us with this thing. And they quickly agreed to do that. One little side note, the fellow who started this thing, his name is Evan Marwell. I had worked with his mother, Bobby Marwell, at the school district for many years. And it was through Bobby that we got connected. Evan and I got connected years ago around the initial project. Madison West graduate, great person, doing great things for kids. Couldn't say enough wonderful things about him. Serious Packer fan, which really helps. But in all seriousness, they've done a fantastic job, and we've been so grateful to have their resources available to us. And these are tools that are being used across the country now too. That's another important thing I'll get to in a little bit, is that these tools are being used everywhere, not just in Wisconsin. So speaking of collaborations, another really important collaboration was with our CESAs. CESA is an acronym that stands for Cooperative Educational Service Agencies. They're regions of Wisconsin that school districts are members of a regional CESA. They're cooperatives, and in the truest sense of the word, they are truly membership cooperatives. In that, remember what I said about the size of school districts in the state of Wisconsin. They're so small that many of them can't hire their own nurse or their own social worker or their own speech and language clinician or their own this or that or the other thing. And so they cooperatively do that. They cooperatively pay for things like professional development services. But another interesting thing they cooperatively do is manage their procurements, their purchasing of products. And so each of the CESAs do some of the same things, but some of them specialize in things. And one of the CESAs, CESA 2, the South Central Wisconsin CESA, runs a purchasing program, a procurement program, much like the state has a contract program or the university has their statewide contracts. the CISAs do the same thing, and any school district in the state can purchase off of those contracts. This was an incredibly important entity for us as we thought about how do we get internet access to kids if the school districts are going to provide that access for some of those kids who need it because they can't afford it. And so we worked with CISA purchasing, and I did a lot of phone calls to internet service providers last spring, and we connected them with CISA purchasing. CISA purchasing built out a platform. Basically, it's a curated marketplace of these products and services, including these internet service provider offerings that school districts could purchase in bulk on behalf of students that needed connections in their areas. And so it was fantastic. And I'll just show the next slide here, which is that there are 3 different pieces of products that are available. One are those internet service packages that we were talking about, which are, by the way, are pretty generous, I think, in terms of pricing. They've done a pretty good job of bringing their prices down for this particular use case, and I do give them credit. Particularly there are a lot of local small telcos around the state that are doing a great job doing that, and the large ones have too. The large providers have done that as well. In addition to being able to buy internet connections, though, they can also find hardware here, devices, computers, Chromebooks. The most predominant device that you're going to find in a school district today is a Chromebook. It's just ubiquitous. And then software packages, Zoom licenses, Google Meet licenses, all these different things that you needed in order to be able to do learning digitally. So those are all available through the Digital Learning Bridge. One of the most recent kind of things that has evolved in the Digital Learning Bridge is the work that we're doing with philanthropy. I'm going to give a particular shout out to Steve Goldberg, who I believe is a member of Downtown Rotary. And Steve had approached us asking about how they could assist with internet connectivity for households that needed it. And we had a conversation about the Digital Learning Bridge. And I introduced him to the rest of my team that had been working on this, plus the CISA purchasing folks. And with those conversations, they decided to pursue a pilot project that was granted some funding through the Public Service Commission Broadband Office to explore how they could operationalize and extend the philanthropic network through the Digital Learning Bridge to provide the resources to help with the connectivity needs of households across the state. And we have every reason to believe that's going to go well. And the mechanisms we've put in place through this administrative process, lean and mean as it is something that hopefully that they can take advantage of over the long term. While we know that we can solve this infrastructure problem, we also know that there will always be affordability issues. It's just the the way of the world, and that's why we need to be able to help support families. And with the grace of philanthropy, we are that as one mechanism for doing that. There are others, but as one mechanism, it is a wonderful resource to be able to leverage. So, thank you, Steve. I just want to loop back to the digital equity gap data collection again, because I think this is where the core of the work is from a scalable perspective for all those different data use reasons I mentioned early on. We did have to come up with some common questions. And the other thing we also knew is that, like I said, the questions weren't going to be idiosyncratic to Wisconsin, or let alone Madison or Dane County or anything like that. These are common things, questions that needed to be asked of parents in order to be able to help them with connectivity issues. And so we work very closely with Education Superhighway, with the other state education agencies, and with some other partners that we've had a long history with now of operationalizing the software for how we move data from school districts to the state education agency, and then on to state and federal agencies that also need those data. And that particular entity is another nonprofit. This one is created by the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. It is called EdFi, the EdFi Alliance. And it's a community of state education agencies, local school districts, and we're building out this software infrastructure that can be leveraged for purposes of moving data in a secure, real-time kind of way to help operationalize the kinds of decision support systems that school districts need in order to be able to, to do work better and to do learning better. And so, with the history of working with the EdFi Alliance and the vendor community that ultimately has to, be implementing this software, we were able to strike up an immediate conversation about getting those data moving through the system. And as I mentioned, it can take 6 months to 2 years to try to do something like this. And they literally did this in weeks. In a couple cases, a few months, but not much more than a few months. The school districts all use different software. Predominant players are the ones mentioned just on this middle of this slide. Not that that means anything to any of you, but those particular vendors have done a fantastic job, not only here in Wisconsin, but across the country in terms of being able to operationalize this particular data need, and among other things that they do, but really did a fantastic job. And so what that enables, of course, is for school districts like Madison to stand up in their Infinite Campus parent portal these kinds of questions. So when parents sit down at registration or non-registration time, they can answer these questions, and that data will be available to them immediately. The other thing we realize is that not everyone has access to a device, and so sometimes you need paper. And so we literally operationalize these questions in the form of paper and PDFs that can be printed as well. So the data is not a required data collection. And so I think it's, let's see if I can move this thing. I guess I can't. Anyway, it is not a required collection. So we don't have data from every school district in the state. However, we do have data from about 2/3 of the school districts. And that represents about 2 out of every 5 kids across the state. It's a fairly representative sample, but even from that, we were able to extrapolate to statewide estimates. And so what we currently see today is that there's about 14,000 kids that simply don't have access to any provider whatsoever. These are oftentimes in the most rural and remote locations, which interestingly doesn't even have to be all that far away. And I know that came up in Brittany's conversation. Doesn't have to be all that far away from a metropolitan area, but you just might not have a provider. And then almost another 10,000 just simply don't have access because they can't afford it, even though there are some things now available to help them. They're still expressing a need from an affordability perspective. And then another 14,000 kids are being provided access by their school district through a hotspot kind of program. For the most part, that's the technology they're using, but not always. Sometimes there are cable providers that are offering some of these programs, and the school district is providing those too. So in addition, though, to not having access, right, or having access temporarily because someone else is paying for it, we also had that question about performance. We really wanted to make sure we understood whether or not the internet connection they did have was working for them. And so we did ask a question about whether or not they could use the internet for the learning purpose as defined by being able to watch a video, streaming a video for learning on their primary learning device. And there are over 25,000 kids that can't do it flat out, say no. Their parents say no. So it's a big number. In addition to that 27, well, it's better than 27,000 kids. In addition to those kids, another roughly 150 or 60,000 kids have parents reporting that it doesn't work consistently. Now, that may be because they're bumping into data caps. It may be because of the latency of the technology they're using. Satellite connections have terrible latency, so they get choppy. There's a variety of different reasons why they would not be able to use whatever connection they have consistently for learning purposes. But as you can see, this is a big chunk of kids that still are addressing some of the, having some of the problems that they've been facing from the onset. We know that we can fix the access issues for the most part. And we believe we can fix the affordability issues, in part because of the generous philanthropy that's available, but in some of the other public resources that are being available to help families. Again, this can be solved. There's no question it can be solved. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that the problem is not hitting all kids equally. So when you look at our data, what you can see is that, and let me I'm going to click this one off for a second because I wanted you to see the graph here. When you look at whether or not, you just ask the question, do you have internet access in your residence? The percentage of kids that say no by race and ethnicity is pretty astounding. It's almost 3-to-1 in terms of American Indian children saying they don't have access compared to their white peers. It's clearly 2-to-1 for an African American student, and that's also the kind of gap you see when you look at kids who have special education needs or kids who are English learners. The same kind of issue exists in terms of not having access and it not being distributed equally in terms of that particular equity problem. So we've got to keep our eyes on this, and we've got to keep addressing the systematic issues that are creating those barriers. I want to just talk a little bit more about speed, because I think that was, it's related to that performance question, and this is really important. We can solve the infrastructure problem, but when we do it, we have to solve it for the long term. We have to solve it so that people never answer no to the question, can you use it consistently? You have to be able to use it consistently. And so we to address that, in addition to asking that question, we also embarked on an outreach campaign between January and April of this year to have school districts encourage their kids and parents to run speed tests at home. And we worked with another nonprofit out of North Carolina whose name is Measurement Labs, or M Labs for short. And they spun up some dashboards that were really helpful and still exist. These still exist. You can go to our website, you can find them, that demonstrate at the district level what some of the issues are relative to performance. And they can benchmark their data against what's defined as broadband. And I know Brittany went through that last month with you. And what you'll see very quickly in some of these situations is some very poor speed performance. And so we have to continue to build infrastructure that addresses that and gets us to a place where we have what we need for all of the purposes that are being used within a household. The only way to do that, and this is going to get to where we're trying to encourage districts to lean in with their relief money, is if we start to build out fiber to the home. There are clearly other technologies. They can be helpful. They probably will fill gaps. But for the most part, fiber to the home is truly the future-proof solution that's needed. And by future-proof, we mean you don't need to upgrade electronics every 5 to 7 years. You just simply have the capacity you need in a fiber optic cable that will last for 50 or 100 years. Folks ask about, spending money that our grandchildren will be paying for. And my answer to that is, it's as long as my grandchildren are still using it, then I guess I don't have a problem with them paying for it. And the other thing that people will always say is, can we really do this? And is it technically feasible to be able to put fiber everywhere? And I guess the answer to that one is, we can look back 90 years ago and we can clearly see that we did this once, and it was called electricity. It got everywhere. So I don't think you can make a case to say you can't get it everywhere. You really can, with some exceptions. I get that, with some exceptions. And yeah, clearly we may need some things to help on the interim basis until we get there. But, I keep encouraging the next 5 to 7 years, we better be solving this problem once and for all, because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to do it with the funding that's being made available. So that's sort of the technical aspect of this. And it does relate to this particular slide where we've talked a little bit about what it is that you need to be able to do to connect kids. And you really need to be taking a good hard look at your relief funds that you've got at the school district level. We're encouraging libraries to do the same, even though they don't have a whole bunch of additional funding directly to them. But in some cases, they do have some resources. And so we're encouraging folks to say, hey, what can you do to connect your students and your staff, and be very creative about that. Lean in and try to figure out, and you've got a bunch of data now to help you understand where they are. Those who have and have not do not have access. So you have the data to be able to articulate that for folks. And I guess the other real important thing to remember is that your resources are only one share of resources at the K-12 level. There are other resources coming to local units of government, towns, cities, villages, counties. They also have money available that they can be using for infrastructure projects. And then, of course, the state does too. The governor just released $100 million for that very purpose. So it's really important. The message has got to be that you can solve this problem once and for all, but it's going to take all of you contributing your resources together, combining those resources, and then finding the partners that are out there and willing to help and do so over the long term, right? Not step in and step out, but literally be there with your community for the long haul. And so that's some of the most important advice we're giving school districts right now. And in doing that, the other thing is we're suggesting is be innovative about how you engage in these relationships. If you're going to commit some public resources, then you need to get something back for those in return. And we've seen some interesting cases. I know Washington Island, our smallest school district in the state, they are working with the electric co-op on the island to build out a fiber project. And in doing so, they are requesting that some of the funds that they're putting into the pot be used to do the service laterals out to the student and staff homes to defray those costs. And I think that's an example of a very innovative and very focused way of using those resources to accomplish the goal. Other school districts are suggesting that they hold back some of those resources so that they be used in the long term for, again, this notion of connecting households that need to be connected that may not be able to afford it. So just a couple of examples of how they can be innovative and how they should be thinking about what they get in return when they do pool these public resources in partnership with a private provider. And that's kind of it. That kind of wraps up what I wanted to share. Again, I want to thank you for allowing me the time to give you an update on where we are with the K-12 aspect of the broadband issue. And I just want to close by saying how important it is to continue to keep this one front and center. It is clearly one of those things that problems we can definitely solve, and we will solve if we focus on it and dedicate ourselves to it and do it collaboratively. So thank you again. I appreciate your time and attention. If there's any questions at all, I am available, and I'm sure that Rotary leadership will help point you to me if you have something that I can help answer. Thank you.
We are adjourned.